furnace
Matt, can you
in
hear
another
me?
year, but
It's not a lot of options. Wherever you want, it usually doesn't get
Matt,
too
can you hear me? I can see your screen.
too. Yeah, I never had one get around that. I was worried.
and I'll be like, wait. I can double check
Matt, we're
this.
testing our microphone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, somewhere.
All those ones drinking wine and all that, all these babies. Grass.
Hey, Tammy, can you hear me?
I like
I
that.
can hear you. Can you hear us?
Fall. Fall, there you go. Halloween. Oh my God.
Can you hear us, Steve?
It looks like you're talking, but I don't hear you.
Can you hear us now? Can you hear us now, Steve?
Hey, Tammy, sorry, one more test. I think if I turn on his speakers, I can hear you better.
Testing.
Yep, I can hear you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
It's live.
Walk like that. Yeah, good idea. Okay, there we go.
The October 13th, 2022 Whatcom County Planning Commission meeting is called to order. I'll call the roll. Robert Bartel.
Here.
Kelvin Barton, that's me. I'm here. Atul Deshmani.
Hi, I'm here. I am gonna switch from my phone to my PC in a minute.
Okay, thank you. Jim Hanson. Jim Hanson. Stephen Jackson. Stephen Jackson. Julie Jefferson. Julie Jefferson. Kimberly Lund. Kimberly Lund. Dominic Masseri.
Here.
Scott Van Dalen.
Here.
Okay, please join me in the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now it's time for department updates. Assistant Planning Director Steve Robert will give us a department update. please.
Sure. So you guys went through the wireless committee, made a recommendation to council, that'll be going to council very soon. Your next couple of items that are coming up on your agenda are going to be the public benefit rating system application review. That's the open space taxation. And so if things go tonight, that'll be at your next meeting or the next meeting. And then following that, we'll be talking about some miscellaneous code updates, kind of a code scrub that we try to do every year. Pick up a lot of those little things that aren't really of themselves something that we want to. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. For the record, Julie Jefferson has just joined the meeting. Yeah, now is the time for open session for public comment, and that's comment on things that are not on the agenda tonight, the public hearing. And our planning commission coordinator, Tammy, will you go ahead and take over?
Sure. Welcome to the meeting. This meeting is being broadcast live. The audio is being recorded and will be posted to the county website. As noted on our website, members of the public may watch the meeting or join online or by phone. During the open public session, speakers may not speak to items that are scheduled on the agenda for public hearing tonight. So during this particular session, you may not speak to the buildable land report, and you may not speak to the public participation plan. Those items will come up with public hearing later in the evening. So does anyone in this public area in the room wish to speak to general public comment, not part of the public hearing session? Neither of which topics I mentioned. Okay. If anyone online would like to speak to a general topic, not one of the hearings for tonight, please raise your hand. So to raise your hand using the internet, you'll press the hand icon, and if you're calling in my phone, it would be *9. No hands are raised.
Thank you. We'll move on to commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments? Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I just want to say I had a conversation with Darcy Jones, who was one of the people that sent some comments.
No other commissioner comments. Let's move on to approval of minutes for the September 29th, 2022 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the September 29th meeting.
Second.
Are there any additions or corrections? Seeing no additions or corrections, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund, oh, not here, Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
and Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That is 5 yeses, so that carries.
That 5 or 6.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, 6, you're correct. I didn't mark that. 6 yeses.
So our first topic of the night. I've got kind of written in backwards here, but Matt, buildable lands report.
All right, thank you. For the record, my name is Matt Ahmet, representing Planning and Development Services. And in 2017, the state legislature amended the Growth Management Act, or GMA, by adding Whatcom County to the list of buildable lands counties in the state. And they added a number of other amendments to the buildable lands statute at that time. And the buildable land provisions of GMA are also known as the Review and Evaluation Program. So the GMA identifies kind of three main purposes for the Buildable Lands Program. And this includes looking at achieved densities within urban growth areas, determining whether there's suitable land available for development in the future, and identifying what they call in the statute reasonable measures, if necessary, to reduce differences between kind of comp plan growth assumptions and actual development patterns. So the Buildable Lands report addresses both past development and future development in light of existing county and city comprehensive plans. And this report will also inform the policy discussions that will take place in the context of the next comp plan updates, which are due in 2025. The buildable land provisions of the GMA indicate that counties and cities need to determine if reasonable measures are required or not. And we just wanted to note a couple things about reasonable measures. They do not include expanding urban growth areas. So the Buildable Land Program looks at things that can be done inside existing urban growth areas. And they address differences between growth and development assumptions and targets and actual development patterns. So the Buildable Lands report is not intended to evaluate all comprehensive plan provisions and countywide planning policies, but just those that have development assumptions or targets. Under the GMA, the Buildable Lands Program applies to the county and to all 7 cities throughout the county. So the county and cities work together in close coordination to develop a unified approach. And this comp plan map shows the 7 cities in yellow, and each city has an urban growth area shown in purple. And these are the areas that cities can annex in the future and then provide public water and sewer and be developed at urban densities. So there are also 3 standalone urban growth areas that are not associated with the city: Birch Bay, Columbia Valley, and Cherry Point. And then the agricultural lands are shown in light green, the forestry lands in darker green, and rural lands are shown in brown or pink. Whatcom County and the cities, with the assistance of a consultant, issued the Review and Evaluation Program methodology on February 10th, 2022. And the methodology is a separate document from the Buildable Land Report. And you may recall that we briefed the commission on the methodology, on the draft methodology last fall. So we also developed 2 spreadsheets that were tools that facilitated the evaluation. The first one was called the Data Reporting Tool, and the city and county planners entered data relating to building permits and plats that were approved between 2016 and 2021, along with other information. And then the Suitable Land Tool. And the cities and county entered assessors data on developable land, critical area deductions, density assumptions, and other information to estimate the number of people, homes, and employees the buildable land can accommodate in the future. The county and cities, again, with a consultant on board, spent several years developing the Buildable Lands Program, collecting data, and performing analysis. And the result of that work is the Buildable Lands Program that was issued on July 7th, 2022. And so tonight we're going to review some of the key findings in the report, and we're asking the Planning Commission to recommend that the County Council approve the report. So we're going to provide an overview of the main findings of the Buildable Lands Report, and we'll do this looking at the county as a whole. Then we'll look at Bellingham, the small cities, the non-city urban growth areas, that's Birch Bay, Columbia Valley, and Cherry Point, and then the areas outside urban growth areas. Those are the rural and resource lands. So we'll start with the countywide overview. So this slide shows the population information for the various areas, and the 2021 to 36 remaining population growth column that's highlighted in yellow shows how many people the land supply would need to accommodate over the remaining portion of the planning period through 2036. And then the population that can be accommodated by the land supply is shown in the next column to the right. And then the surplus deficit column shows whether the land supply can accommodate the anticipated population growth. So only Birch Bay shows a deficit, meaning that the existing land supply cannot accommodate future projected population growth for this UGA. So it's anticipated that the land supply in all other UGAs will be able to accommodate future projected growth in the remainder of the planning period through the year 2036. And then overall, on a countywide basis, the projected population growth from 2021 through 36 can be accommodated by the land supply. So this slide shows employment information. So the 2021 through 36 remaining employment growth, again highlighted in yellow, shows how many employees the land would need to accommodate over the remaining portion of the planning period. The employees that can be accommodated by the land supply shown in the next column there to the right. And as shown in the surplus deficit column, it's anticipated that the land supply in all UGAs will be able to accommodate future employment growth in the remainder of the planning period through the year 2036. And also overall, on a countywide basis, employment growth can be accommodated by the land supply.
Matt, could you hold one moment for a technical issue, please?
Sure.
Okay, could you just say something? I'm going to see if I can turn you up.
Yep, I'm here.
There we
Can
go.
you hear me?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. So that's the countywide summary. Now we're going to look at the Bellingham urban growth area. Within the city of Bellingham, residential development occurred at an overall density of 11.5 units per acre between 2016 and 2021. And this was higher than the planned density in the Bellingham comp plan of 7.2 units per acre. It's also within the density range set forth in the Whatcom County comp plan of 6 to 24 units per acre. So the city of Bellingham is reaching the density goals in the city and county comp plan. So between 2016 and 2021, development in the Bellingham UGA outside city limits did not meet the ultimate planned density for the city. The city of Bellingham generally does not extend public water and sewer into UGAs prior to annexation. And the county zoning is set up so that it does not allow urban densities without public water and sewer. Therefore, urban development is not expected in the unincorporated portion of the UGA prior to annexation. So the Buildable Lands Program evaluates whether there is sufficient suitable land to accommodate population growth through the year 2036. For the Bellingham UGA, the land capacity, after deducting critical areas, future public uses, infrastructure, and market factor, is sufficient to accommodate the projected population growth. The buildable land can accommodate about 10,600 more people than it would need to over the next 15 years. So I would note that the current planning period is through the year 2036. This will be extended to 2045 in the next comp plan update, and the county and cities will establish new growth projections through this new planning horizon. So the Buildable Lands report compares the land capacity to accommodate single-family and multifamily homes to the estimated need for these housing types as derived from the Whatcom County Comprehensive Plan. And so things like group homes and college dorms, et cetera, assisted living are included in the multifamily category. But Bellingham's suitable land tool estimated that the land in the city and the UGA could accommodate about 4,200 additional single-family units. And the county comp plan indicates that just over 4,000 more would be needed in the remainder of the planning period. Bellingham's suitable land tool estimated that land in the city and the UGA could accommodate about 11,800 additional multifamily units. And the comp plans indicate about 7,700 more would be needed through the year 2036. So in both cases, there is adequate land capacity to accommodate these housing types. The Buildable Lands Program also evaluates whether there is sufficient land to accommodate employment growth through 2036. So for the Bellingham UGA, the land capacity, again, after deducting critical areas, future public uses, infrastructure, market factor, is sufficient to accommodate projected employment growth. The buildable land can accommodate about 2,000 more employees than it would need to over the next 15 years. In the buildable land program, local jurisdictions review whether past growth and land capacity to accommodate future growth is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So if there are inconsistencies, then reasonable measures must be implemented to reduce the difference between the comp plan provisions and actual development. And Bellingham, the city of Bellingham has not identified any inconsistencies, and therefore the city concluded that reasonable measures are not required. Okay, so we're going to move on to the small cities. So this chart shows the densities for the 6 small cities. So there are 3 columns with numerical values. The left-hand column shows the planned density for the jurisdiction, typically set forth in the comprehensive plan. The middle column shows the density achieved between 2016 and 2021, and the right-hand column shows the difference. So numbers are shown in red when the planned density was not met. So development within the city limits of all small cities exceeded the minimum planned density, and that's a positive. Between 2016 and 2021, development in the Ferndale and Linden urban growth areas outside city limits did not meet the ultimate planned density for the city. We would mention that there were only 3 dwelling units constructed in the Ferndale UGA, and 2 of these were accessory dwelling units. And 1 dwelling unit, an accessory dwelling unit, was constructed in the Linden UGA outside city limits. So none of the small cities extend public water and sewer into UGAs prior to annexation. And again, the county zoning is set up so that it does not allow urban densities without public water and sewer. So urban density development is not really expected in these unincorporated portions of the UGA prior to annexation. So the buildable lands program, again, evaluates whether there's sufficient land to accommodate population through 2036. For the small cities, the land capacity after making all the deductions is sufficient to accommodate projected population, and this is for each city individually and cumulatively. So cumulatively, buildable lands in small cities can accommodate about 23,700 more people than it would need to over the 15-year planning period. So as mentioned, the current planning period is through 2036, and this will be extended through 2045 in the next comp plan update. So the county and cities will be working on new growth projections with additional growth for that 9-year period. So buildable lands report again compares land capacity to accommodate single-family and multifamily homes to the estimated need as set forth in the Whatcom County Comp Plan. For a single family, the suitable land tool estimated that the land in all the small cities and their UGAs could accommodate the additional single family units needed through 2036. For multifamily, it's estimated that land in all small cities and their UGAs, with the exception of Nooksack, could accommodate the additional multifamily units. Nooksack does not have a designated multifamily zone and therefore shows a deficit. However, in the buildable lands report, Nooksack notes that multifamily development is allowed in the single family zones, and some of the single family land could accommodate the multifamily needs. Okay, employment. For the small city UGAs, land capacity, again, after all the deductions, is sufficient to accommodate projected employment growth. And this is true for each city and cumulatively. The buildable land can accommodate about 12,700 more employees than it would need to through 2036. As mentioned, the buildable land program, local jurisdictions review past growth and land capacity for future growth, and to see if that's consistent with the comp plan. If there's inconsistencies, those reasonable measures are needed. 5 of the 6 small cities have not identified any inconsistencies, and therefore they have not identified any reasonable measures. The city of Blaine, commercial and industrial densities expressed by floor area ratios are a bit low. So Blaine will address this in its next comp plan or development regulation update. Okay, so there are 3 non-city UGAs in the county: Birch Bay, Columbia Valley, and Cherry Point. So we'll look at Birch Bay first. Within the Birch Bay urban growth area, residential development occurred at an overall density of 4.5 units per acre between 2016 and 2021. This is lower than the density range set forth in the county comp plan of 5 to 10 units per acre. So this will have to be addressed with reasonable measures going forward. Additionally, land capacity in Birch Bay UGA is not sufficient to accommodate population growth. So the buildable lands would need to accommodate about 1,250 additional people above what it can already accommodate over the next 15 years. And that will again have to be addressed with reasonable measures. And the Birch Bay Suitable Land Tool estimated that the land in the UGA could accommodate a little bit over 1,300 additional single-family units, but the comprehensive plan indicates that about 2,800 more would be needed through 2036. And again, this is not adequate land capacity to accommodate the single-family need, and this will have to be also addressed through reasonable measures. So for the Birch Bay UGA, the land capacity after deductions is sufficient to accommodate projected employment growth. So the buildable land can accommodate about 154 more employees than it would need to over the next 15 years. So in summary, there are several issues that will need to be addressed for the Birch Bay UGA in the upcoming comp plan or code updates. And these include increasing densities so that development occurs in the 5 to 10 unit per acre range set forth in the comp plan, and increasing capacity of land to accommodate population and single family housing growth. So the buildable land provisions indicate that reasonable measures do not include expanding urban growth areas, as I mentioned. So these will have to be addressed by, amendments that increase the density on the existing land within the urban growth area. So the second non-city UGA is Columbia Valley in the East County. Within the Columbia Valley, residential development occurred at an overall density of 4.9 units per acre between 2016 and 2021. And this is within the range set forth in the comp plan of 4 to 6 units per acre. The land capacity in the Columbia Valley UGA is sufficient to accommodate projected population growth. The buildable land can accommodate about 1,200 more people than it would need to over the remaining 15 years of the planning period. The Columbia Valley Suitable Land Tool estimated that land in the UGA can accommodate about 840 additional single-family units, and the comp plan indicates that about 493 more would be needed through 2036. So there is adequate land capacity to accommodate these single-family units. For the Columbia Valley, the land capacity is sufficient to accommodate projected employment growth. Buildable land can accommodate about 119 more employees than it would need to over the next 15 years. However, job growth has been slower than anticipated in the Columbia Valley UGA, and this will need to be addressed in the upcoming comp plan and or code updates. So it may take the form of potentially rezoning land in the northern part of the urban growth area. And when the Foothill Sub-Area Plan was adopted, it designated a site as planned light impact industrial, and that could be rezoned to light impact industrial zoning. It's currently zoned rural forestry in the urban growth area. The third non-city UGA is Cherry Point, an industrial UGA that does not allow residential development. For the Cherry Point UGA, land capacity is sufficient to accommodate projected employment growth. The buildable land can accommodate about 1,700 more employees than it would need to over the remaining 15 years of the planning period. However, Cherry Point UGA experienced negative job growth between 2016 and 2021. The reason for this is the Intelco shutdown in 2020. And if not for this shutdown, actual job growth would have exceeded the projection in the county comp plan. So the Port of Bellingham is actively working to recruit a business for the Intelco property, and this would be the reasonable measure to address the issue. So on to rural and resource lands. The county comp plan allocated 16% of the countywide population growth to areas outside UGAs, and the estimated growth between 2016 and 2021 matched this 16% figure. Additionally, there is adequate land supply to accommodate projected growth outside UGAs between 2021 and 2036. So we're going to just touch on the buildable lands report adoption process. So County Planning Commission is holding this public hearing tonight on the report and will issue a recommendation to the county council. The county council will also conduct a public hearing. And then the county council and each city council will consider adopting a resolution or ordinance approving the buildable land report. Then after that, reasonable measures will be adopted if necessary. This is kind of a very simplified graphic showing key steps along the way that will ultimately lead up to the adoption of the comp plan updates in 2025. And you can see the buildable lands report will feed into the reasonable measures and the updates. The county does have a website devoted to the review and evaluation program. And the easiest way is probably just to put in your search engine, Whatcom County Buildable Lands Program. It should come up. So in summary, state law was amended in 2017 to add Whatcom County and the cities to the list of jurisdictions that must have a buildable lands program. The county and cities work together with the assistance of a consultant to develop and issue the buildable lands report in July. And tonight, the Planning Commission will take public comments and make a recommendation on the buildable lands report. And I would like to acknowledge the city planners for the knowledge, skill, and work that they contributed to the buildable lands report. It's really all of our reports, not a county report per se. It's all of our report. I'd especially like to acknowledge Chris Behe, City of Bellingham Long Range Planning Manager, who's in the meeting tonight. Chris did a number of things to contribute to the buildable land report that included conducting countywide analysis that benefited all jurisdictions, all 7 cities and the county. It also kind of helped to troubleshoot when any jurisdiction had issues with their data reporting tools or suitable land tool. So there was big old spreadsheets and had a lot of formulas, and once in a while they would go sideways. So we had to kind of troubleshoot, and Chris was a great help in that. So that concludes our presentation. So if we had any questions, we'd try to address those. As I mentioned, Chris is here on behalf of Bellingham.
Commissioner Masseri?
I have one question on the process. So it sounds like each city was individually compiling data and then sending it off to have the county, further compile that. But was there any review and evaluation of the data that was being collected, or is every city just kind of being relied upon to do a thorough and proper job?
Yeah, basically the cities were being relied on to do their own job. I would note, however, that we developed the methodology. Again, the county and cities jointly developed the methodology with the assistance of a consultant, and the spreadsheets were also developed. The data reporting tool for collecting data between 2016 and 2021, and the suitable land tools for estimating land supply between 2021 and 36. Basically, they were all set out. We all use the same spreadsheets. So the jurisdictions, in accordance with the methodology, entered their deductions, like each jurisdiction would determine their wetland deductions. Each jurisdiction would determine their occupancy rates, average household size. Chris did a study on average household size, I think from the census and OFM. So there's kind of parameters that, okay, we can see OFM says this, census says this, and a jurisdiction, a city, selected the one they would use. Deductions for infrastructure. We would look at the information that came out of the data reporting tools, like plats would be entered, and we'd kind of figure out how much area is used for roads in a plat, stormwater for a plat, and then that would be plugged into the future development. And then jurisdictions would make their own deductions for things like how much parkland we're going to have in the future, or if there's a site set aside for a school. So I would say, yeah, each jurisdiction did their own analysis, but it was within a well-established framework with uniform spreadsheets, and just some of those assumptions that went into it, were developed by the jurisdictions. But
We have any more commission questions for Matt? Commissioner Masseri?
Yeah, my other one had to relate to Blaine. You did mention that they did have some reasonable measures they were gonna take, but they didn't get listed in the finding as facts as having actual reasonable measures needing to be taken. And I was just curious why that was.
Well, it's because the county is going to adopt this and each city is going to adopt it. So we put reasonable measures relating to county-related UGA. So, you know, the reasonable measure they need to take is with their city code, which they have jurisdiction over. We don't really have jurisdiction over their city code. So that's why it's not in there.
Commissioner Desmani,
So Chair, right now, you just want us to ask questions, right? And then we'll have a public hearing and then we'll have discussion, right?
that's correct.
Okay, so first question I have is regarding how you calculated occupancy. How do you know occupancy and how do you determine that?
From OFM or census figures. And Chris, I don't know if you want to kick in on that a little bit. Chris did some work for us on occupancy and average household size and.
Sure. Chris Behe, City of Bellingham. Yeah, like Matt said, the census measures occupancy a couple of different ways. The decennial census that happens every 10 years. So most recently in 2020 and previously in 2010, that's the actual 100% hard count that we all fill out forms for every 10 years. And that's the most accurate, but also least frequent count of occupancy in each household in the nation. And then the State Office of Financial Management in those 9 years in between each census uses building permit data from each jurisdiction in the state rolled up at the city and the county level. And then also they use supplemental information from the U.S. Postal Service looking at delivery rates and occupancy, vacancy rates and things like that in households. And they model how those trends changed between those decennial census years. So what we did, as Matt indicated, we looked at recent Office of Financial Management, Washington State estimates for the county and for each of the cities in the county, because they do a separate estimate for each jurisdiction for single family housing and for multifamily housing. And then we also looked at the most recent available census data. And in addition to the decennial census data, there's also the American Community Survey, which is not as accurate, but it is updated every year with a rolling sample of households. And so looking at all that information, we put together as Matt said, I put together a report that just basically laid out each estimate for each city and for the county. And then we left it up, as Matt said, we left that up to the jurisdictions as to which specific value they were going to pick for their single family and multifamily occupancy rates. And then for those occupied households for single and multifamily, the number of persons per household that they would allocate, again, based on those sources that we provided.
Just what does, so from, how would you define occupancy then? That's reported in the report?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How would you define occupancy? The numbers that are reported, so they mean that the home is actually owned by somebody and there's nobody staying in it? Or it's just that the owner is not staying in it?
Right. So we're not talking tenure. So not owner renter tenure, but rather whether the house is vacant or whether there's somebody living in it. So that's, we take the model that we use, as Matt indicated, how we assign population to the number of households or housing units in each jurisdiction. We first say you have a certain number of households, and then of those, there's a percentage that are not occupied, they're vacant. And then for the ones that are occupied, you have a persons per household that you assign to each one of those units. And we do that based on the style of unit, whether it's a single family or a multifamily type of housing. And those, based on the housing type, those numbers vary.
If a dwelling is rented, it's still considered occupied, right? Just making double sure.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding. Your sound is a little fuzzy on where I'm receiving it. Can you say that one more time?
Sure. If a particular unit is rented, then it is considered occupied.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So each jurisdiction has, depending on, the city or the county, a blend of units that are either being rented or are owned by a homeowner who's in the home. And so, again, we don't look at the tenure of whether they're a renter or an owner. We just say, is there someone occupying the unit? And they could be either a renter or an owner. So we don't, the model doesn't account for owner renter status. It just says, are there people living in that house or not? And then based on the unit style, we assign how many people we think might be living there.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have is about the targets for 2036. And so targets for 2036, Chair, can I proceed with my questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, so next question is about targets for 2036. And for 2036, there's different, of course, municipalities. And for example, Ferndale and Linden seem to be, depending on how you look at it, exceeding expectations on occupancy and yeah, a growth of population, and also doing growing quite a bit in terms of commercial and industrial jobs. So is there a mechanism for these estimates for 2036 to be revised to reflect that? Or are those frozen in time in a 20-year window?
So we have a comp plan update. The last one was in 2016, and that's when those projections were established. They were in the Whatcom County Comprehensive Plan and then adopted into each city comprehensive plan. So those will be updated in the 2025 comp plan updates, and the planning horizon will be extended 9 years to 2045. So there'll be, additional growth that will be allocated for the new 20-year planning period, 2025 through 2045. But we're probably not going to go back and just revise the 2036 because we're just going to update them anyway in a few years.
And then one last quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
It's regarding housing and affordability of housing. Of course, that's a popular topic in our community and around the country. And is there anything about what we're doing today that relates to that?
So the county's view on that, I'm going to let Chris share after I'm done, but the county's view is that the buildable land statute, RCW 3670A 215, does not address affordability. The GMA, that's part of the GMA, but the GMA also requires a 2025 update to the comprehensive plan. One of those things will be to address GMA requirements, like the housing element was just revised at the state level. So the state legislature adopted changes to what local governments have to have in their housing elements. And there's more emphasis on affordability and equity and so forth. So it's our position, the county planning development's position. I talked to our director today that the buildable lands report does not address affordability, but the 2025 comp plan update definitely will.
I would, just speaking for Bellingham, can't speak for any of the other cities, but I would agree. Bellingham would have a similar interpretation that this is this report is looking at achieved densities and how we're performing on that aspect of land use and development. And that our next comp plan update, as Matt indicated, will have a housing needs assessment and be looking at that whole spectrum of how many residents do we have in each kind of income category, and what kinds of housing and affordability levels do we need to achieve to make sure everybody's got a chance to find housing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Masseri.
You have a question on the 5-year look back period on permitting that's been done and how, housing that was created or housing units. It says that it's using data that goes back to 2013 for the permits. Is it including permit data as far back as 2013? Because wouldn't that inflate the numbers at the rate of the units being permitted?
Well, the projection in the county comp plan for housing was between 2013 and 2036. So I think we talked about this at the City County Planner Group, and we just decided to extend that period back a little bit to get the permits between 2013 and 2021, and then look at what was left for the remainder of the planning period,
But if you're
21 through 2036.
you're using 2016 to 2021 to decide if we were staying on pace, and we were 9.5% behind pace, but we'd be even farther than that if you were including an extra 3 years, correct?
If you want, I can speak to that. So the buildable lands report is just that 2016 to 2021 5-year window, but to make a valid comparison, kind of an apples to apples comparison between what's in the adopted county comprehensive plan, because that goes back to 2013, we needed to look at units that each jurisdiction produced for that earlier window of time as well. We weren't doing a density analysis for those years, just for the 5-year period covered by this report. So, but because that comparison in each jurisdiction profile deals with unit production over that time to match up with what's in the table in the county comp plan, we just needed to have that so that the time periods matched, have that additional few years of permit data in there.
But would that mean that in the period for a jurisdiction where you said they produced X amount of permits, it's including 2013, 14, and 15 to say that it's going to be on track for the next 15 years? Is that correct?
To match the, I think I understand what you're saying. We had to go back to 2013 to have a period so that we could match the totals that are indicated in the county comp plan, because the county comp plan, the planning horizon is 2036, but the land capacity analysis and the unit totals that are discussed in that plan are from 2013 to 2036. So it's actually a 23-year growth component that's in there. And that's just because of, we started the planning exercise in advance of the adoption date for that 2016 plan. So that's, and to answer your question about if it's inflating it, there's no, the time periods match, so there'd be no inflation or distortion of the values in there.
We have any more questions for Matt or for Chris? We are supposed to have a public hearing and then a work session. So I'm going to open the public hearing, but Tammy, would you explain the rules way better than I can? So the hearing is open.
Okay, so I just want to remind everyone that the meeting is being broadcast live and the audio is being recorded. It will be posted to the website. We do have some public in person tonight, so we're going to have you go first. And for those of you who've already signed in, I'll have you just go on up in the order that you signed in, and then we'll deal with the online people. A couple things that you need to know, and that is that you have 3 minutes to speak. I'm going to attempt to share a screen timer, and so as long as our technology is working, you'll be able to see your time counting down. You're welcome to use your own pen to sign in. There is a common pen there, and if you so choose, there's some hand sanitizer there as well that you're welcome to use. So we will start with the in-room people. When you do go up to share, I ask that you state your full name for the record. All right. And I'm going to actually turn the camera a little bit here just before we start so that we can see you. And we'll have you go up to the pulpit. So looks like we have Darcy, then Brian, and then R. Perry. Okay. Just one moment till I get the timer out, and we'll have you state your name and we'll have you go ahead. So 1 second. Go ahead and state your name for the record. and you may begin.
Hi, I'm Darcy Jones with Jones Engineers in Bellingham. First, I want to thank you all for hearing everything, and I hope you've had a chance to review some of the testimony we've submitted to you in writing. And I also want to thank staff, Matt and Chris, Steve, and some others before them. I know Greg Ockett of the city was really involved here too. But they've been really great at sharing information and sharing their time to help explain some things for us. And I had a lot of questions, but there was a lot of data. I have, I think, 5 or 6 main points I make in my letter. You know, I'll just get to the points. And, you know, the first point I make is somewhat aspirational, but we think the buildable lands report can do better with regard to addressing some of the issues. You heard Matt mention that, yes, the GMA has been updated to address housing issues a little more in depth. And, you know, given that this is the first buildable lands report for Whatcom County, we were hoping we could maybe even raise the bar, raise the standard a little bit from what's been traditionally done in Washington State and other counties and cities. You know, we think the 2016 comp plan does include some of these elements regarding affordability, variety of housing, preservation of existing housing stock, things like that. Those are targets and goals. Those are growth strategies in the existing comp plan. And I guess I should back up and tell you, most of my comments are really focused on the city of Bellingham's jurisdictional profile, to be fair. So we do think there's a higher standard for buildable lands reports. But there's been a lot of good work done, and absolutely. Second, the availability of land is extremely constrained, and we don't agree that there's a surplus of single family land in Bellingham at all. As a matter of fact, we believe there's a deficit of land. We understand clearly what the calculations were, how they got there. Most of the future single family houses are expected to be in multifamily zone lands. We think they're depending too heavily on infill toolkit and attached type of product. There's a lot of assumed densities or assumed build out in certain properties. The west side of Samish Hill, the west side of Lookout Mountain, steep, no access, wetlands, forested. Really, we think are unreasonable expectations to have 500 or 600 dwelling units and essentially single family dwelling units in those areas, especially in the next 14, 15 years. It's unachievable, and it's not right. So I think my time's already up, but I appreciate it. And I know there's other speakers with comments. Thank you.
Go ahead and state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Brian Jones. I'm also with Jones Engineers and work with Darcy, and I met with Chris Behe and Greg, and staff has been really good. We really appreciate that. Again, I'm speaking partly to Bellingham, but also for countywide. The most startling remark in the report, in my opinion, was that everything is good. We can carry on as is, and we don't need to change anything. And it's remarkable because a week later, the mayor of Bellingham and planning, brand new planning director got up and announced in the state of the city that we're going to really have to change things, and that we're really going to have to make some big changes in how we do housing. And so we've got this one report on the 7th saying no problem, and we got another announcement by the mayor just a week later saying we have a real housing crisis. And I find these things, I can't resolve them in my own mind. Why such different perspectives in the same building? What concerns me is the city of Bellingham doesn't seem to want to be the center of of Whatcom County anymore. It's building housing product and it's proposing housing product in multifamily and attached units, not your traditional single family housing. That is found out in Blaine and Sumas and Ferndale and some of these, and in rural areas. And these areas are not always equipped to handle the growth that's projected. They may have land where that's zoned for single family detached, but I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure that most of those people have to drive in, and we have impacts to these small cities' budgets and their resources. That's not a criticism of the calculations done in the building lands report, but I think it's a concern regarding the whole philosophy of we'll set aside this much land and then we're good. Regarding employment, our employment has lagged over projections 10% year over year. Am I done? Dang. Okay, thank you.
And for the record, and go ahead.
Perry Eskridge, I'm the Government Affairs Director and Executive Officer for the Whatcom County Association of Realtors. I'm going to go really quick. This report is not ready for prime time, and I'll give you a really, really good example why. If you go through the report in great detail, you will find that Bellingham, when they're talking about single family households, where are they going to put the majority of those single family households? The report actually proves that 75% of the land set aside for, or 75% of the single family homes to be built in Bellingham over the rest of the planning period are supposed to go in multifamily zones. At the exact same time, Bellingham has an entire web page that talks about how they are not going to allow single family homes in multifamily zones. In fact, there's currently a moratorium prohibiting single family homes in multifamily zones. And that's where they say in this report, 75% of that housing is going to go, not ready to be distributed widely. In the regulatory discussion for the Bellingham profile, they don't even discuss that fact. And it makes me wonder if city council's talking to planning or if planning knows what city council's doing. So that is a huge glaring error. And that is something that I think really needs to be considered by this planning commission. I keep pointing out that the reason Ferndale, Linden, Sumas, Everson, Nooksack, to Blaine to some extent have housing problems is because Bellingham has a housing problem. They talk about all these units and all these people that are going to be accommodated, but they never tell you what the units actually are. In talking to a lot of developers who have built a lot of the multifamily housing, 75% of housing construction during this current comprehensive plan has been multifamily. But what does it look like? The vast majority, according to the people that know this, have told me it's studios and 1 bedrooms. You can find a couple 2 bedrooms smattered around, 3 bedrooms are at a premium, and all of it is market rate. So that demonstrates that they can say they're going to accommodate all of that population, but have they really reconciled the units that are actually being built with the needs of the population that are coming? We know from Bellingham's own planning director who just started here, it took him nearly, I think it was 6 or 7 months to find a house that would house his family. There's a reason that we have a housing crisis. The planning that the city is engaging in has totally disconnected from the needs of the population. Last 10 seconds, affordability, if you look at the planning goals, both in the city of Bellingham and the county, those planning goals are inextricably twined with their conversations on affordable housing. And the fact that they don't address that, I think, is another huge glaring issue in a report that just, as Brian said, really missed the mark. It's a missed opportunity.
there anyone else who would like to speak on this topic? To look at the attendees. Okay, I have one attendee with the hand raised, so Robert, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, there's two Roberts. This is Robert Lee, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
Robert Lee with the Building Industry Association of Whatcom County. We'd like to go on record that we agree with everything that and the data that was in Jones Engineering letter. So I won't cover the measures they've covered, but we've got a few concerns of our own, specifically with the city of Bellingham. City of Bellingham has not realized affordable housing with its infill toolkit. The process is very hard to use, and the builders that do successfully use it are ending up having to build high-end homes, and it does little to address the missing middle. We believe there's a lack of adequate capital facilities, arterial streets, trunk, sanitary, sewer, and water lines, major storm water systems, et cetera, in under or undeveloped urban areas. We believe excessive development rules, for example, wetlands, streams, and habitats, the Department of Ecology wetland rating forms, and arbitrary buffer tables will show that the rules are just excessive and unwieldy. High permit costs and fees and often slow subjective review processes are very difficult. Underzoned areas in the UGAs with extra large lot requirements, for example, Birchwood, South neighborhoods, and Bellingham. And we also have concerns about the data on jobs. In the comprehensive plan, the Bellingham urban growth area has a growth allocation of 19,688 new jobs between 2016 and 2036, implying an increase of about 1,000 jobs per year. The achievement of this goal assumes that industrial and commercial land capacity is the primary driver of employment, and that if we have enough land, we will achieve our employment goals. However, between 2016 and 2021, Bellingham only created 3,108 new jobs, or 621 per year. To make up this deficit over the next 15 years, we need to produce 1,105 jobs per year, or 150% of what we created in the first 5-year period. The report states that no reasonable measures are needed to accomplish this goal of accelerated job production. In addition, the report does not consider a primary barrier to employment, the cost of housing. In Bellingham, housing costs have doubled since 2016. We included a chart in materials I submitted today. Many employers report losing well-qualified applicants because they can't find affordable homes in Bellingham. This results in the leveling off of employment, even though there are jobs available in the community. Please consider taking reasonable measures to produce more homes that are affordable to employees across the income spectrum. This, more than measuring commercial square footage, will increase employment in our community. Again, thank you for your time and the opportunity to make comments.
All right, we have one other attendee. So if you would like to speak to this topic and you've joined by computer, go ahead and press the hand icon. Oh, there we go. Okay, so. Okay, and if you are calling by phone, it's *9. So. There we go. Robert Carmichael, are you hoping to speak? I'm going to click allow to talk, and if you'd like to state your full name for the record, we'll get the timer started.
Yes, thank you. My name is Robert Carmichael, 1700 D Street in Bellingham. And I want to focus on really one thing. There have been some good comments tonight. I would encourage you all to read the letter that Darcy Jones put together. But the one thing that I think has really been a failing over the years, and I've been practicing as an attorney in land use for almost 40 years. I've seen land use planning before GMA and after GMA. GMA has made a lot of great strides in sophistication in planning. But one of the things that has been a failure in recent years, in my opinion, is the ability of local planners to realistically assess potential density in the areas that they identify that land is available. And that's a crucial calculation, and perhaps the most crucial calculation. And I understand there are deductions made for marketability and critical areas and so forth and so on. But the reality has been that most of those assumptions have proved to be overly optimistic over the years. And I would suggest that for some of the reasons mentioned in the Jones letter, we're going down that same path again of being overly optimistic about the developability of certain land. As soon as you put in a more realistic assessment, and what I would suggest needs to be done is a feasibility study of these areas, as opposed to simply some superficial analysis of what's there in terms of zoning and some critical areas and so forth, but a real feasibility study involving the costs of infrastructure. What's the rate of return that someone could expect? How long will it take? What's the likelihood that that land will really be developed in the time period that is assumed in the report? And keep in mind that assumption that's made by the city planners will drive the conclusion as to whether there is sufficient land available. And that's the heart of their analysis here. So if that's wrong, the whole report is wrong. And what I would suggest is the reason we have a housing crisis now is because time after time over the last many years, I've seen overly optimistic assumptions made about land availability and developability. It will be built out, but it doesn't actually come to pass in that way. And we do have shortages, particularly of single family homes for that reason. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
There are no other attendees.
And we have no other attendees, so I will close the public hearing. Questions, commissioners? Commissioner Desmond.
Well, my big question about affordability comes back of housing. And, all of our public comment, these are people who are active in the community as it relates to these issues and have been for some time. And they're saying to us that sidestepping the issue of affordability is unwise. So I'd like to hear from my colleagues on the commission. The staff was telling us that affordability is not the focus of tonight, yet all these commenters told us that, well, we have to think about it. So I'd like us to decide whether we go with the commenters or we go with staff on this issue.
It's, are you asking a question of staff?
I'm asking a question of everybody. Everybody.
So, well, are you okay, Commissioner Desmani, if I phrase that as a question for Matt?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair.
Yes. So Matt, what about affordability in the buildable lands report? Can you share what the intent is? And you need to unmute there, Matt.
Okay, yes, we fully concur that affordability is a critical issue in our community, in our cities in the county. We're just saying that it's our opinion that we don't believe this is the vehicle to address that. I mean, it's called the Buildable Lands Program. We're assessing, how we've done in the past, how the comp plan has performed in the past as far as, reaching densities that are set forth in the comp plan and estimating how much land will be available, over the next 15 years of this planning period. Affordable housing will be addressed in the 2025 comp plan update, which starts in 2023. We're supposed to get some funding from the state legislature, quite a bit of funds as we understand it. We've already got a preliminary draft scope of work for that process, which includes addressing the affordable housing, the housing element of the comp plan. And the county and cities have worked on this scope of work together. And so we'll get a consultant. They will study this issue, recommend, policies or provisions for county and city comp plans throughout the county. So we're just saying that, the buildable land statute, RCW 3678-215, does not address affordability, but that will be addressed starting next year.
Commissioner Desmani, did you have further questions?
Yeah, and so the thing is how to channel the obviously thoughtful points of the commenters, all, I think, pretty much unanimously. And that is that in the review of the comp plan as it relates to affordable housing, is there the ability to augment or add a multiplier to all the housing targets that takes what's being adopted in this report and revises that number upward based on the obvious mechanisms of supply and demand? I mean, I'm sorry perhaps to oversimplify what the commenters were saying, but one way for me to simplify it is to recognize it as, of course, there's supply and demand. And ultimately, our supply is insufficient. And that's what's driving up prices. And so is there a way that when we get through the review of the policy discussions that affect affordable housing, that a multiplier can be implemented on the recommendations that are coming out of this buildable land study?
So,
Then it can be revisited, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but okay. Yeah, so like in this last round, we had a consultant in 2016 comp plan update. The counties and cities developed population projections through the planning period. We had a consultant on board to do this little housing study. They took those projections, converted those into single family and multifamily dwelling units, looking at, again, the occupancy rates and the average household sizes, things like that. The area where we have to be careful is that, for example, on sizing urban growth areas, the Growth Management Act is interpreted by the Growth Hearings Board all the way up in the courts in Washington. We have to plan for 20 years basically worth of growth and not a whole lot more or not a whole lot less. Or in fact, the county in the past has been appealed for UGA sizing and lost because we'd oversized our urban growth areas. So when you talk about a multiplier, that has implications on the land supply and implications on, UGA, potentially UGA sizes. So we just have to be careful what we do there. And I don't know, Chris, if you have any comments on this?
No, you said what I was thinking exactly. Just that we have to do our best to balance past historic growth trends with what we think is, what consultants and knowledgeable experts inform us they think is going to happen in the next 20 years, and then using all of the assumptions that are in the growth models, like what Matt has described, with looking at buildable land and all the deductions that go into that. Our best estimates as to what could be built in that planning window and how many people those housing units can accommodate. And we do include things like market factors to allow for market forces and property owner choices and those kinds of things for, people that will choose not to develop a certain percentage of their land or those kinds of things. But we, even those percentages, the Growth Hearings Board has set out some pretty clear, bright lines on those, where if you go above a certain percentage, you're subject to appeal, and you could be sent back to the drawing board to redo your plan or to adjust it. So yeah, Matt's absolutely right. We have to pay attention to those numbers and be as realistic as we can.
The other issue on that is that we've had these discussions with the City County Planner Group in the past. The population, the land use element of our comp plan and the population projections have to be consistent with a capital facilities plan. And some cities are concerned, they want to try to get realistic. Realistic, it's tough to predict the future or estimate the future, but on target as they can, because they have to size their, capital facility plans for that population and employment growth projection. So, that's been a sensitivity over the years too. If we inflate it, and it may mean that they have to up their capital spending in areas they may not think is realistic or may not want to.
Commissioner Desmani, continue, please.
Yeah, so maybe maybe multiplier is the wrong word, but ultimately, there has to be some mechanism. I mean, just thinking off the top of my head, perhaps a price parity adjusted derating of the supply, meaning that if we keep the supply curve, the demand curve fixed, and we could derate the supply curve based on what the actual same price point on housing is. So what's happened is that demand has risen, but somewhat predictably, and supply has been constrained. But if we think about where supply needs to be to maintain static prices, it would be a faster acceleration of supply than we've currently had. And so one way to look at that is to derate the effective supply based on the same price. And this may be getting too technocratic, but I'm just saying that that's the job of staff anyway. It's not my job. The thing is that we have to innovate some way of capturing this concern on affordability.
And really, you're getting into perhaps the next update, how we look at population projections and so forth. The buildable lands really is looking at the existing comprehensive plan, what the projections are now for population and employment, and do we have adequate land supply or not, and have we met densities we planned for or not, that type of thing. So we're dealing with what's in the comp plan right now for this report.
Commissioner Masseri, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on Commissioner Esmani, as was stated earlier in the comments, it's also not just the amount of units, it's the type and quality of the units, right? So if maybe we're keeping pace by balancing it with too much multifamily, that's going to also raise the price of single family homes because there's a higher demand for it. So along with what's been said about these issues, what can we actually do here, Matt, to be somewhat productive as a body? Otherwise, it just feels like a rubber stamp meeting to me.
Well, the buildable lands is about land supply, right? There's a number of factors that go into housing costs. I talked to somebody who got delayed on a building, and it was building materials went up and everything, and there was a whole different issue. They had a lot, didn't have anything to do with that. Their house went way up. So there's a variety of things that go into housing prices. Land supply is one of those. That's what we look at as city and county planners. Do we have adequate land supply? Now, there's also a policy issue you're talking about, with which individual cities make policy choices about, what mix of single family and multifamily they choose for their communities. And that is, somewhat of a political decision by, that city or that jurisdiction. And again, Chris, I don't know if you have anything else to kick in on that or.
No, not really. I think, yeah, those are decisions that are made when we update our comprehensive plans. And as we mentioned before, there's a housing needs assessment that communities will be doing as part of their update to their housing chapters. And that will involve all of those questions about what's the mix of housing. And once you figure out that you need a certain number of housing units to meet a particular group of people in a particular income range, then you can start to evaluate what styles of housing might be available in that price range that could be built by the community, and try and adjust your policy base accordingly. So those are all the questions that we hope to be engaging people on in the next few years.
Commissioner Bartel.
I was wondering if any of the public speakers had very specific things that they would like changed. If it's possible to ask them for input.
I'll entertain that question if you'll make it specific to one and ask the question. So Commissioner Bartel, go ahead.
Yep, so Darcy, if possible, is there like page 7, item 10, you would like to see change? That's not weird. Some other recommendation that you would give us for how to incorporate what you're saying? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Should I step up?
We'll then record it
Either way.
either way.
Yes, and I appreciate that, and I've given that some thought, and of course, we're making recommendations to the county council. And from my perspective, a recommendation could be made to the county council that the jurisdictional profile for the city of Bellingham be re-reviewed for actual reasonable capacity analysis. And I've given you 3 examples of properties that I specifically believe are not reasonable for expectation for full build out over the next 14, 15 years. I think on a policy level, I think, the fact that there are no reasonable measures being proposed by the city is related to the fact that in what they state on page 34 of the Buildable Lands Report is the city has come a long way over the last 6 years to implement regulatory changes and rule changes. And the implication is a lot of the things, density incentives in an infill toolkit project type of things. And I believe the implication is that because of these things that they've put in place, they don't need any more additional measures. And if you sort of let them take their course, things will work out for housing. I don't quite believe that. I appreciate there's a lot of good steps that have been taken, no doubt. But I think it's still lacking. The problem still persists. So I would honestly recommend to the county council that the city of Bellingham look at beyond the reasonable measures that they've already proposed and incorporated. Okay. And I recognize the mayor and the new planning director of the city actually proposed what they called a radical new housing affordability plan. Well, that sounds like an additional reasonable measure to me, addressing affordability probably very directly. I would also, quite frankly, tell you that the city of Bellingham, should just simply revisit it and I think recalculate their capacity for residential, specifically single family residential, and even within the city single family residential component to really look at what the mix or the split should be between attached infill toolkit type of single family versus what we all understood single family to mean in 2016 is primarily detached single family homes. Because if we don't provide enough of what the the market wants. Families will continue to move out into the rural areas and at the smaller cities. That's been going on for almost decades now. There's a lot of unintended consequences about that. So I would encourage the city of Bellingham to revisit their calculations. If I could, you saw a slide that said there was 10,600 surplus population for Bellingham. The total was 30,120, 208. Well, that's all in multifamily. If you convert that to dwelling units, there's no. You saw that according to the city's calcs, there's capacity for 4,200 new single-family dwelling units, and we only need 4,050. Well, there's other versions of that worksheet, okay, that have a much lower number than the capacity of 4,200. There's a worksheet that I have that it's 4,121. I mean, it's arguable, but they have a razor thin, even by the math, a razor thin surplus is what they call it. If you read my letter, you'll see that. And if you subtract the 500, just the simple properties I put up there, you're in a deficit really quick. And Bob Carmichael's comments were really, really helpful for me because that's been the essence of the problem. If have unrealistic expectations about how soon and how many units are going to get built up on that hillside or in a certain valley, those are deal killers right there. And most of the land I showed you is where most of the true detached single family in the city's plan would go. If you look at their table, there's only 500 new units that are going to 500 new single family units that are going to go in existing single family zones. 505. The rest of it goes in either multifamily zones or mixed use. 73% in multifamily zones. That tells you something that we're really relying on the attached infill toolkit product, which will fit some needs of some of our community, no doubt. But there's a significant amount of our community that will choose to find a family home outside of Bellingham. And I think that is the crux of what I'm saying. And you're going to need more land supply, so true real land supply for single family homes. And so I really believe that the city of Bellingham should revisit and realistically evaluate what the goals of the 2016 comp plan were, specifically with regard to single family homes. And that doesn't go to any of these other subjective soft questions. It's just, what were the numbers? We know what the numbers were. We're supposed to accommodate 5,171 single family homes between 2013 and 2016, according to the county comp plan. We have 20,720 more people to accommodate. How many of those can live in the city? Those are hard numbers. And what was the understanding in 2016? Being intellectually honest about what was a single family home in everybody in the room at the hearings. I understand this discussion about alternative housing products in the comp plan, housing and land use chapters in the city, no doubt. But to what extent? Did we expect 50, 60, 70, or 80% of our new single family homes to be attached units or infill toolkit small? I don't think so. So thank you for allowing me that time, and I appreciate it.
Commissioner Bartel.
Staff see it as appropriate to include something like what Darcy was talking about, to ask the city to reevaluate their numbers or something of that nature.
I guess, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Is it okay I guess I'd like a chance to respond to the comments from Mr. Jones, if possible.
Commissioner Bartel, can you pause for a moment? Chris, go ahead.
No, sir.
I just wanted to just point out a couple of things. First, the comments that were made regarding percentage of Bellingham's single-family supply that are in single-family zones versus the multifamily zoning. The suitable lands tool worksheet, which is the document that we're working off of with the statistics, it's around 88% of the single-family units of that 4,200 unit total figure that Mr. Jones was talking about. About 88% of those 4,200 units are in residential single zones in Bellingham, zones that would have a residential single general use type. And about, I don't have the exact number, but a good number of those are what we would call residential single with a cluster provision. And so those are zones where you can build detached single family housing, or you can build infill toolkit housing types. And the most common one we've seen in recent years has been the single family attached townhome on a fee lot. About 80% of the units we've seen built, the 300 or so built in the last 5 years in that category, have been single family detached townhomes single family attached townhomes on their own fee lots. So it's an ownership product. I know that some people disagree on whether or not we should call that a single family product or not, but it's allowed in those single family cluster zones. We do get a lot of them in residential multi zones as well. But when they're built on a fee lot, a person can purchase those. I guess the example that a lot of you are probably familiar with be if you go north of Costco in Bellingham to the Aurora Court development, those are being built in a residential single cluster zone, and they're townhomes on fee lots, and they're attached in groups of 6 or so in a row. So just to clarify that about 88% of the single family units we're counting in our future supply are in single family zoned areas. The second comment would just be that as is described in detail in the methodology that Matt referenced, and we do follow very closely the state's recommended guidelines, Department of Commerce's guidelines on developing they develop a cookbook, very step-by-step approach to doing a land capacity analysis and a buildable lands analysis. And we do, we start with vacant property, and I would call your attention to the properties that Mr. Jones pointed out up on in the Whatcom Falls neighborhood. There's a assembly of parcels up there and you could see in his letter that he submitted different numbers of units that are counted on them. And those are zoned a range of densities around, like a good portion of that area is 20,000 square foot. Some of it's higher density than that. And, we start with the vacant land, then we take out all of our deduction for wetlands, areas with steep slopes. We have wetland buffers, and Bellingham has opted onto the fairly conservative side. I think of all the jurisdictions, we picked the largest wetland buffers to apply in our model. We picked 150-foot buffers across all of our mapped wetlands that we have. So we remove that from the buildable area. Again, the steep slopes. We also account for the petroleum and fuel pipelines that crisscross that neighborhood. There's the Trans Mountain and the Olympic pipeline, and we buffer those and take out that corridor for buildable area. We also take out across the board for all vacant residential single land residential land, we take out a 4% deduction for our future parks. Our park and rec plan in the comp plan allocates over 100 acres of buildable dry land for future playgrounds, ball fields, those kinds of things. And so we take, after we do the critical areas deductions and we're left with that buildable dry land, we take out a percentage of that to build up over the entire supply, over 100 acres of buildable dry land that would go to future parks. We also take out, once we've done that deduction, a 5% deduction for quasi-public uses. And so that's, again, off all vacant land. That would be for things like future churches, Masonic lodges, future private utility buildings, Cascade natural gas pumps, pumps and those kinds of things. We also take out, once we are left with that figure, we take out 24% for single family land for future dedication of right-of-way for new streets and for things like stormwater detention ponds. And again, those numbers are all based on and driven by the data reporting tool, and the amounts, like Matt indicated, that we found were taken out of recent plats and developments that were actually on the ground, and what were the averages for those over a period of time for the previous 5 years. And then once we end up with that, that's what we call our net developable area. And then off the top of that, before we calculate dwelling units, we take in the case of vacant residential land, we take 20% market factor off the top of that. And so it's this kind of reductive process. And I'm just speaking specifically to that Whatcom Falls neighborhood. I looked at the figures, and what we counted in that particular area, there's a block of land identified, I think, in the letter that Mr. Jones submitted. We count about 35% of the total area in that block of land is developable, and the rest of it is the other 65% is in those categories we just named, where we peel all that off the top before we calculate the density or the number of units you can achieve. So we feel like we are being relatively conservative. We're following the approach the state recommends. There are certainly timing issues, but we do have, there are new subdivisions happening in Bellingham. There's one fairly large one working its way through on the top of Queen Mountain right now, working its way towards a final plat. So, to the best of our ability, we do that. There's one other deduction I didn't mention in here. I think in the area in Whatcom Falls, it's a 10% deduction. In the Samish Crest area, which is another area that Mr. Jones mentioned, we take a 50% deduction of the final developable land figure, and that's to account for the Department of Commerce's recognition that jurisdictions have different timing on provision of public infrastructure, or it's sometimes called an infrastructure gap. And so that's when you look at Bellingham's wastewater conveyance plan, or adopted water supply plan, or our transportation infrastructure plan. There are different portions of the wastewater treatment network, the water supply network, or the transportation network that are city funded and planned for in future rate increases for customers, and some are identified as developer provided, or it's a blend where the city and the developer will each kind of chip in to provide something, and there are different mechanisms of financing those over the period of time covered by a comp plan. So we looked kind of around the edge of the city in a lot of these areas that we would classify as greenfield development, and those two areas that Mr. Jones mentioned are two of the ones we looked at. And we decided, based on the amount of public infrastructure in place right now, what's needed in the future, and then what percentage we indicated in those adopted infrastructure plans we're relying on developer participation in providing those. We took deductions, and like I said, in that Whatcom Falls neighborhood, it was a 10% deduction off the top, and then in like the Samish Hill area, it was a much higher one, because it's a more there's some terrain issues, there's some other access issues there. And so we took 50% off the top of the estimated capacity for that area. So we feel like we've been as thorough as we possibly can. We've been very conservative. And he's right in that the surplus for the single family capacity, again with all those caveats that there's eventual build out beyond 2036 could be potentially higher once you get all those infrastructure places in place. But I would say that the precision of the model is it's a model like any other kind of a thing. It's as precise as we can get it, and the margin for single family is much narrower than multifamily. And again, I would go back to those statements in the report where we highlight the policy initiatives that Bellingham's been successful with since 2016. We really have expanded that multifamily capacity. And I would say that if you look at the planning department at the city of Bellingham, our work program, we have an inclusionary housing study that's on our work plan for next year to look at what's possible in single family zones and in multifamily zones for affordable housing. And what is that will include a market study to see what's feasible, and then depending on the results of that market study, we'll engage a consultant to make code recommendations as to what a program for inclusionary zoning might look like to provide a percentage of affordable housing for new development. And then also we have our second phase of our infill toolkit, which will again be looking at how can we maximize the use of the infill fully served properties we have in the city. So I just wanted to kind of give you that context that there are a lot of things in the works and ongoing work. The comp plan is not fully implemented. We're only 5 years into this current planning cycle, or 6 years in now. And there's a lot more to do. Again, I would also just say just on the final word on the mix of single family housing that we do in our supply count single family attached. If it's on a fee lot and owned by a homeowner, we count that as part of our single family supply. And we really encourage the development of those infill toolkit housing forms because they do provide an ownership product and make really efficient use of our our very limited land supply. We want to make the most efficient use of that and provide ownership products in any way that we can. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer any other questions, but I just wanted a chance to respond to those comments.
Commissioner Bartel, continue.
Yep, so thank you, Chris. So back to the question for staff and Matt. It seems maybe inappropriate for us to ask anything of the city, but I was wondering, is that something we should entertain here if we so desire? Would it be appropriate? And just for everything Mr. he was saying, it's so complex what the city's doing. We don't really fully understand. I heard all the words, of course, but I wasn't sure whether this planning commission should be recommending something for the individual cities to be doing.
Right. I mean, from the county planning perspective, and we've had kind of the whole issue of how the county and cities interact. And, we do recognize the autonomy of the city. We're not like overseeing the city in their planning or their policy choices. So we tend to, they have professionals there who do their planning work. So we, as a planning department, we tend not to try to, we have conversations. I'm not saying that. We do have conversations, but we don't have authority over what they do inside the city limits. And I guess I would say that some of these issues, like Darcy brought up, like one of them deals with affordability, like the radical affordability plan talked about the mayor. And it's our position that the buildable lands doesn't address affordability. It addresses land supply, and that affordability will be addressed starting next year. We'll get a consultant on board as we ramp up for that 2025 update. So it sounded earlier like Chris in the city of Bellingham concurred with that view. So, if you kick that back to them, I don't know what they would do with that, being that, I think the county, the city of Bellingham, and all the cities have not interpreted the buildable land provisions of GMA to require that. And then there's other things like the mix of attached and detached. And maybe, Chris, I could ask you a question on this. Does the city of Bellingham comprehensive plan have any targets or goals for single family attached versus detached?
No, it doesn't. It encourages or talks about, a mix of housing types. It does not get that prescriptive and say we have a target of exactly a particular share. It does talk about we had kind of a three-legged strategy that began with the 2006 plan, and we reinforced in the 2016 plan, where we are achieving our residential growth in particular, but employment growth also in our urban villages, in our and then in our existing neighborhoods through things like the infill toolkit, and then in our urban growth area, in the unincorporated urban growth area as we annex areas. So kind of a three-pronged approach of targeted infill in neighborhoods on in smaller focused areas, and then our urban villages are really picking up a third or more of that residential and a large majority of the employment growth.
Okay, and so the buildable lands is evaluating what's in the city comp plan and county comp plan now. And so if there's no distinction in the city comp plan between attached and detached, you send it back to them, it's probably not going to go anywhere. That's probably more of a policy discussion that could be had as the city updates their comp plan, in the next few years leading up to the 2025 comp plan update. So I'm just saying from two perspectives. One, the county, we don't have authority of what they do inside the city limits, and we try, we've had discussions and so forth. But at the end of the day, the city is its own political entity, makes those policy choices. So we try to respect those and work with the city in those. And then we have to remind ourselves that this is about evaluating the existing comp plan and the goals and policies in that, and not, new policy choices that might be considered in the next comp plan update.
Commissioner Esmond, you've been patiently waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say, but anyway, I think I've got a suggestion and a solution that will hopefully address Commissioner Bartel's line of questioning. But before I do that, I'd like to hear briefly from one of the members of the public has his hands up, Bob Carmichael. If Bob Carmichael could just take a quick minute to speak to the issue that Commissioner Bartel raised. Otherwise, I've got a specific proposal.
And so I'll go ahead and allow you to ask the question.
Thank you. I really appreciate, there's a couple things I wanted to say that I think I can add something on. One is, I agree, first of all, with the county and the city that there is nothing in the buildable land statute that says they're supposed to address affordability. They're right about that. But what hasn't been mentioned is that the buildable land statute does require looking at whether the objectives of the comprehensive plans have been met or satisfied. And the city of Bellingham does have a comprehensive plan provision in the housing chapter at land use goal number 5 or policy number 5 to foster neighborhoods with a balanced mix of housing prices that are compatible with the wages and incomes in the community. So while it's not directly in the statute, it is indirectly in the statute. And it is certainly something the county and city could have chosen to address in this report and chose not to. And I understand why, given resources and so forth, but I wanted to at least mention that. And then the second point I wanted to make with respect to infrastructure, while I understand the deduction of 10% in Whatcom Falls, 50% at Samish, the truth is, if it doesn't pencil out for a developer, the amount of development will be zero. So if you have 90% or 50%, it doesn't really matter. If it doesn't develop because the infrastructure is not there in the planning period, it's going to be zero. So really what should have been done is what I said at the beginning, feasibility of whether it will likely go or not go. And it's our position that it's not going to be developed in the planning period. And you can do all the deductions you want. It's still not going to address the fact that if it's not developed, you're going to overestimate the supply. And the last thing I wanted to mention was references to the infill toolkit, and the city has mentioned this in its documents, that is something that they've emphasized and are having more success with. They're getting more traction with it. The truth is that infill toolkits do not produce affordable housing. My understanding of the data is, and I've even heard Mr. Behe say this at a presentation, infill toolkit development usually is not affordable housing. And you're more likely to get affordable housing and allow for that mix of housing affordability with different segments of the population outside of the infill toolkit model. So those are the things I wanted to mention. I think one of the best statements made tonight was when it was said that the study is not ready for prime time. And I understand that county and city have put a lot of time and effort into this. We've got good planners. I'm not saying we don't. I think they're going by Department of Commerce guidance. The problem is that guidance has produced deficiencies in the past, which have gotten us into the situation we're in now. And I think it's time to call a stop to it and do something different. That's all I wanted to say.
So I'd like to continue, Chair, if it's okay.
I'd like to address Chris. Chris, I was shopping for a house recently in a community where my family historically lived. And we had our choice of a couple of houses, and we had our choice of 4 single-family houses, except they were attached to another single-family house. And it may legally be defined as a single-family house, but doggone, it looks like a duplex. And if I get rowdy in my side of the house, they're gonna hear me in the other side of the house. And by everyone's definition, except for the government, that's not a single-family house. That's a duplex. And you can take and as a landlord, I could buy one of those or a duplex right here, and I could put a fence in the backyard and a fence in the front and segregate out, each side gets their own yard, but it's still a duplex. And I think it's something that should be considered as counting as other than a single family residence. I don't believe any of us actually, if we lived in one, would say, wow, I own my own yard. I don't have a neighbor attached to my house. So it's a point I want to make, and I also want to make another point that I've been on the planning commission 7 years now. And so I've been through this one before, and I've been through the comprehensive plan, and I've been through when we've talked about allocating lands. And 5 years ago, when it happened, when one of these was going on, people were saying Bellingham is going to get really expensive. They're not going to take their share. And in fact, the feeling of a lot of people was that Bellingham wanted industrial and commercial land, but didn't want the residents. And we were told that 5 years ago, and we could see it from the comments that were getting made by the government workers, I'll say that, because some of it was Bellingham workers, and I mean working for the city of Bellingham. And we were hearing it from some of the county workers. And here we are today with people saying there's not affordable housing and there's not enough housing in Bellingham. So I have questions about it. I have to be honest. Commissioner Desmani.
Thank you. So one of the ways that Planning Commission handles these kinds of situations is by addressing the findings of fact. And so I'm wondering, because there's some implication of scope in the findings of fact, we could add a statement, and I've drafted something, and would like to read it, if that's okay. And I'll read it once, and then if it seems to resonate, maybe we can make it a formal motion. And so I'm proposing a new finding of fact, and I think I'd like it to be number 1 in the order. And it reads like this. Staff and the Planning Commission recognize that the Buildable Lands Report does not address issues of housing affordability. Additional work that revisits the estimates of supply and demand that are feasible, realistic, and consistent with current regulatory requirements and infrastructure are needed.
Tammy's working on writing that. Commissioner Desmani.
Can you repeat it again a little more slowly?
So just, I can put this up on the screen and type it in, if that's okay, while you're.
That's even better.
Yeah, and Matt, what do you think about that, adding that?
Yeah, I like that. We might want to say in the 2025 comprehensive plan updates, because that's really where it's going to get done.
Great. So then, based on that appearing to be support, I think I'd like to make that as a motion. I'll look for a second.
I'll second that.
Well, and a second from Commissioner Messeri, boy, it's a done deal now.
Could you read it back slowly?
And Commissioner Desmond, your microphone's a little bit fuzzy, and so that's part of why we're having a hard time getting it exact.
Okay, sure. And is my distance from my microphone and my volume good right now?
Yes,
Okay, I'll try not to move. Staff and the Planning Commission recognize that the buildable lands report.
Uh-oh. Zach, hold on. Get something going on. I'll fix those in a minute.
Okay, should I continue?
Yeah.
Does not address issues of housing affordability, period.
Okay.
Additional work that.
Okay, period. Okay.
Period, yeah. A new sentence. Additional work that revisits the estimates of supply and demand that are feasible, comma, realistic, comma, and consistent with current regulatory requirements and infrastructure.
Okay, hold on. I'm on feasible. That are feasible, comma,
Realistic, comma,
realistic. Okay.
and consistent with current regulatory requirements and infrastructure are needed. Period.
Did you want to put anything in there about the 2025 comp plan updates or?
I'm very open to that, yeah.
Okay, are needed, and will be reviewed in the 2025 comprehensive plan updates or something like that?
Yes.
Ah.
Matt, can you, or should you capitalize comprehensive and plan as being?
Well, I think we refer to multiple unless we're, because we have Bellingham and 6 cities and the county that will be updating our comprehensive plans all at the same time.
So
I understand then. You're correct.
So I'd like to repeat that as my motion. And is Commissioner Messeri still seconding that?
Yes.
So Chris, do you have any issues with that or comments?
No, I think that's a great addition.
Commissioners, so we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion on it? Seeing no discussion, Kenny, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Desmati,
Yes.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes.
Commissioner Messeri,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That is 6 yeses, that carries.
Commissioner Jefferson.
I just wanted to say thank you to the staff and all those who spoke up because this was really hard, not knowing how to address this. And some of the other commissioners who were bold enough to speak up. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to include or incorporate some of the thoughts of those who spoke up from our community. And I just wanted to thank everyone for participating tonight.
Commissioner Bartel.
There's no other discussion. I'd make a motion to accept the buildable lands report 2022 and the associated finding of facts.
So just to clarify, so we're asking for a recommendation that the council approve this along with the findings of fact.
Would have been my
Yeah.
Okay.
incorrect.
Yes.
Okay.
Matt.
All right.
Asking, are you recommending that the county council approve the finding
Yeah.
and the buildable lands report?
I'll second that.
We actually have a second with Commissioner Van Dalen, but thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, you can third it. Is there any further discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes, I fourth that.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmati,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
6 yeses, that carries.
And I'd like to thank our guests for coming tonight. Appreciate your input. Sure. Appreciate the opportunity. It's nice to see people attend in person. And Chris Behe, I want to thank you for being on here tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. You bet.
So we have another issue. Get to the right page here. The public participation plan.
Okay, so for the record, my name is Matt Ahmet, representing Planning and Development. And the Growth Management Act requires counties to develop public participation programs for comprehensive plan and development regulation amendments. The County Council approved the 2021 plan last May. And the county is now updating this plan. So the plan classifies proposed comp plan amendments and development regulation as level 1, 2, or 3. So in the current plan, level 1 requires a staff report, notice in the newspaper, posting on the website, and sending notice to the county's email list. And it also requires 2 public hearings, one before the Planning Commission and one before the County Council, prior to final council action. Level 2 kind of ups the level of participation a little bit. So you have all the level 1 processes, plus developing alternatives when appropriate, and review by an advisory committee, department, city, or agency. And level 3 requires those level 2 processes plus a town hall meeting. So proposed changes from last year's plan are shown with underlining and strike throughs in your packet. And some of the proposed changes including inserting statutory requirements. So these are requirements passed by the state legislature. And we put in there the 2025 comp plan update and UGA review. That's not a new requirement, but it is anticipated, as mentioned, that the county and cities will commence this update in 2023. We're also inserting new comp plan and development regulation amendments that were initiated for review or docketed for review by the County Council in 2022. And then we're removing amendments that have completed the review process or were withdrawn. So those are pretty standard. And there's a couple new things that we're looking at this year. One is that the public participation plan states that level 1 issues are generally less complicated, have been through extensive public process, or are quasi-judicial. And level 1 projects currently require 2 public hearings, one by the Planning Commission and the other by the County Council. So the proposed amendments would provide the County Council with discretion to forego the second public hearing if they don't change the Planning Commission's recommendation. If they want to change the Commission's recommendation, then a hearing would be mandated. We also have a reference to the Open Public Meetings Act. This is on page 4-1. And we're quoting new language that the state legislature put in the act in 2022. And basically they said at a final meeting, the planning commission or the council has to take public comment, even if it's not a hearing. So like, let's say wireless, we had a public hearing in June, then we met a couple more times. And at each meeting, that could be the last one, you either have to take public comment in the open public comment session, or you could, have written comment, that type of thing. So we're adding that language on page 4.1. Then we got a public comment today, and PDS staff in response to that is proposing a change to the means by which the public can submit comments. Right now, the plan says you have to submit comments by email or US mail, but we want to change that to say that the public could submit comments by electronic file transfer protocol set up by the county, like a Dropbox, because our firewall on our email doesn't allow big submittals. So then they would have to mail them, So we want to just allow that in the public participation plan. We have FTP sites or Dropbox or whatever that they could just submit a large PDF document to the public record. So that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, we try to address those.
Doesn't have anything to do with affordable housing, does it? I'm just kidding.
Commissioner Desmani.
So I'm just noticing, Matt, that the wind has moved substantially up the queue. And I'm wondering, is that a foreshadowing of Mark Bersonius' retirement, or is it actually a good sign?
Well, I think there's some other things deleted. I don't know, Steve. I think is that still at the Climate Advisory Committee?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
Wind energy, is that going to be coming to the Planning Commission anytime soon?
Oh, we hope so. Yeah, it's still at the climate. Sorry, yes, the folks you mentioned, the climate impact advisory group, I think. It's still with them. So we're waiting for the recommendation.
Okay.
Commissioner Bartel.
Just so I understand, the proposals made today by staff to change what FutureWise recommended, do we need to make a motion to add those, or are they just assumed because staff's put them in?
Let's make that a motion.
So I'll put those up on the screen real quick there. So here they are. So this would be on pages 4.2, 4.4, 4.5. Just say you can comment by, email, this other electronic file transfer protocol set up by the county and or US mail. So
We can make a motion and add that, and then we have it on the record.
I would make that motion to add the proposed language.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second.
Shouldn't we have a public hearing before that? Or making motions?
Well, that's a good question. The question is, should we have a public hearing to add this? Or maybe perhaps we should have our public hearing before and then add it after we've had the public hearing. Thank you for the point of order. Okay.
I would rescind my motion.
Okay. So are there any questions for Matt? Okay, then let's open the public hearing. The public hearing is open. Kathy, okay.
Down to one attendee. Is this something that you would like to speak on?
Sure.
Okay, so then we'll have you going up and go ahead and announce your name, full name for the record. And just one moment while I find the timer. Go ahead and your full name for the record, and we'll start your time.
Hi, I'm Darcy Jones with Jones Engineers. We won't need all 3 minutes. I just want to thank Matt to make sure that there's adequate capacity in the FTP site for large PDF files of public comments, because we're going to make some. Thank you.
Well, that's easy.
There are no other attendees.
Seeing no other attendees, we'll close the public hearing. Okay, Commissioner Bartel, go ahead.
I would make a motion to accept the language and the changes to language that staff is proposing. Looking for some more concise. Yeah. Propose the following changes to the public participation plan, chapter 4, pages 4-2, 4-4, and 4-5.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Okay, accept these changes. Is there any discussion? County, would you call the roll, please?
I was gonna necessarily speak against my own thing, but I was a little. Is this going to, create a massive amount of extra input? Is anyone concerned about that? Doesn't seem like it. It sounded like.
Sure, and if I'll do a point of order. We'll vote on this and then we can discuss. We'll come back to your question here, but this is simply to add it, the change that staff recommended earlier today. So go ahead, Kim.
Okay, Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That is 6 yeses, so that carries.
Commissioner Bartel, continue.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't opening a huge can of worms for staff. It didn't, staff proposed it, but still just hearing the comment, perhaps you're gonna be putting like huge files.
A little bit. But there's one person making nervous.
Okay,
They'll get the huge files to us one way or another, so,
okay.
yeah.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I have a little bit of concern about the change on level 1 projects to not require the county council to hold a second hearing, even if they are agreeing with our recommendations, just because, I mean, the counties, for better or worse, people often don't even know that it's gone through us by the time they hear about it, and the county is the only time they even get to speak to it. So I don't know that I would want to possibly eliminate those opportunities. What was the motivation behind that?
Well, there may be some minor things. I mean, you have to put a notice in the newspaper and everything, which is a cost. And there may be some minor things that really may not warrant 2 hearings. You've already had one. And I think the other thing is the change to the Open Public Meetings Act that requires the council to take public comment anyway, even if they don't have a hearing. So they'll either be required at the final meeting where a discussion is, where an amendment is approved, to either allow comment at open public session or written comment on it. So we're good either way. If you want to put it back, we're fine with that. But we thought, give some flexibility to council. If there's some minor thing, they're not compelled to hold a public hearing. So
Yeah, I'd just be concerned that if it dampened down public comment at all, or participation, we've been trying so hard to improve that. I wouldn't want to, even if it's minor, I wouldn't want to risk that. So I would make a motion to remove the change proposed and go back to the original wording.
Dominic, what page are you on?
It's page 4-2.
Okay.
And it's item 5 under approach.
I would second that.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second to remove change on page 4-2, item 5. Is there discussion? No discussion. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
and Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That is 6 yeses, so that carries.
Pass this thing.
We need a motion.
Oh, I'll make a motion that we accept this.
Do we have a finding of facts on this map?
Not on this. It's just a motion.
Very good. Then his motion has been quite an order.
I'll second that.
Do we have any discussion?
Haven't.
Commissioner Bartel.
Just, had I known it was that simple of a motion, I might have made it. Couldn't see it being any more complicated, so I thought. That's good.
That was worth the wait. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Deshmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Dalen,
Yes.
Commissioner Bird.
Yes.
6 yeses, that carries.
Is there any other business comments, anything? Commissioners? Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
Everyone, goodbye.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
It's so interesting. This is not gonna go away, the housing in Ferndale and Linden.